welcome here with
Thank you.
me, and it's a big pleasure to be able to talk with you again.
Likewise. Yeah, this was fun.
Tara, tell me a little bit, how are you doing? Where are you at now? And yeah, what's going on?
I have been working with amateurs and pros lately, and I'm currently in New York. I do all of my sessions virtually. And, a lot of the times players are on the road, so time differences, it gets a little funny. But yeah, I've been doing well, and I'm looking forward to working with more people in this upcoming year.
Mm. Maybe to introduce the viewers of this video, why I want to talk with you. We've been in touch and in contact since the pandemic a little bit. And I got in touch with you back then because I just thought, and I'm still thinking, that what you're doing is just great and awesome. You just
Thank
mentioned that you are working with amateurs and professional players. Can you tell our viewers a little bit what you mean when you say you work with
you.
professional and amateur players? What kind of fields, what kind of areas are you working with them?
Yeah. I'm the founder of Insight Performance Coaching, and I work with players, specifically pool players, on their mental game. And, in sessions with players, I usually listen to what's going on, get a feel for how they are in competition and practice. And we come up with a lot of different skills, techniques, and ideas to really enhance their mental performance because, more times than not, it's their mental performance that will be either their benefit or their detriment in competition.
I learned just from following your advices, or let's put it that way, the questions you put out on your social media, they just made me think. And during the pandemic, I actually wanted to start working with you, and I'm definitely gonna to. Maybe you can talk us through the process. How are people contacting you? How are people getting in touch with you? And
Mhm.
basically, what's the starting point when someone like me or someone else would like to work with you?
People usually get in touch with me either on my social media pages. You know, I'm very vocal about, the avenues that I can be contacted: phone, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, really any of those. And in terms of how I start with players, I usually pose the question beginning of every single session. I say, I usually start the session by asking, would you like me to start and ask, get a feel for you and your history and what's been going on? Or are you dying to tell me something that you really need to address, that we need to jump into right away? So that's always my starting point, because sometimes if I start asking questions, that's not what they're looking for right away. They're just like, listen, I need to focus on this, and that's perfectly fine. So that's always how I start my sessions. And, you know, just being a therapist in general, it's never about me. It's not my agenda. I don't have a structure. I mean, I know a lot of different things I can do in sessions, but I'm not always taking the lead. If there are things that others need to discuss and that we need to get to, great, let's jump there. It's almost as if you're swimming with fish. You know how fish swim? They sporadically change direction, but they go together. That's exactly how I hold sessions. If you move, I move. We move together. So that's usually my game plan.
Before I go into a little bit more detail and ask you some further questions about the topic, can you first tell us what kind of players you're working with? You mentioned professional players and semi-professional players. Are there some players we know as well?
The only two I can publicly say, because I'm a strong believer in confidentiality and
Yeah.
privacy. So the only two are Jennifer Beretta and John Mora, that I publicly work with. They are my sponsored players. So those two are open about it. On social media, Kennedy Meeman has been vocal about it. So she put that out there publicly. She is a junior player. She's up and coming. She's a very strong junior player from the United States.
And I think Jennifer Beretta and John Moore are two hell of a players. So you must do something right if it works for them as well, I guess. The
Everyone has
reason,
different styles.
yeah, for sure. The reason why I wanted you to mention those two names, and of course, I didn't know that you work with them and it's public anyway, is that let's dive into the topic that maybe some people are afraid to even contact people like you, a therapist or a mental coach, like put it that way. And I know, and we talked about it in our podcast during the pandemic already, but when I bring up this topic among my friends and my peers, many of them say, that just doesn't fit me, and that's not something I need. Some even mentioned that they're afraid that their head gets messed up. How do you respond to those kind of, let's say, fears?
That's perfectly fine if people aren't ready or even interested in any mental coaching. You know, if it's working for them and they're able to compete and do their own thing, great, you know, continue. But the mental game is still there. You know, you're not a robot, you still feel. And so for people who want to enhance that, where they learn how to control their feelings, they learn different skills to use when it's hill and you're on the 9 ball and you're about to make it into the money round or even win the tournament, those are things you're going to want to know. I definitely understand the fear though, because there is still that stigma with therapy in general, which is why I'm always very private about who I work with. Nobody else knows except for me, you know, who's in my schedule. So the fear is understandable. I think the bigger question is, well, what are you willing to sacrifice to enhance your game? Are you willing to sacrifice that little bit of pride that I don't need this to enhance your game? Or are you willing to sacrifice maybe some key moments in your game because you didn't focus enough on the mental game?
Because I think I do understand that it also depends a little bit about your goal setting, correct? Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
a psychologist, but I assume if you're just a leisure player and you just like go to the pool hall to have fun and shoot some balls and maybe chat and laugh with your friends, then it's fine. But I think you come into play when people are a little bit more ambitious, when they want to reach certain goals, maybe go higher up in the rankings or win tournaments, correct?
Yes, sometimes leisure players will still contact me because, you know, they'll play in their local league on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night at their local pool hall, and they're just sick of losing. They're sick of, you know, having the same outcome, or they feel frustrated. So, I mean, I definitely have a fair share of league players that just want to have a good experience when they go out. So it does depend on their goals as well. Their goal is just different. You know, I don't want to keep losing at league. I want this to be fun. So that's our focus. And for somebody else who's looking to progress in the field, in the you know, in the rankings or anything like that, their goals will be much different.
Mm. You also mentioned at the beginning of our chat right now that some people might even not need it because they're maybe naturally gifted with dealing with, let's say, pressure situations or with success as well as with failure. But maybe not everyone can handle or deal those kind of situations perfectly. What would you or how would you work with someone in terms of when they're not able to come to you, when they're not able to directly work in person with you? Is there any chance to work with you remote, like we're doing it right now, like over Zoom or
Yeah,
Teams or whatever?
I only work remote actually.
Okay.
You know, there's only specific circumstances where I will be in person. I actually went to the Moscone Cup to work with one of the players on one of the Moscone teams. So that was a unique experience where I was in person. But typically all sessions are remote. Plus, you want the privacy. You want to be able to speak freely. You don't want to worry about people overhearing. If we're in the pool hall, you don't want people to wonder what we're talking about, or have people look over, because it will change the experience of counseling, of the coaching. So honestly, finding a safe space, where you can solely focus on yourself, what you want, your difficulties, struggles. These aren't easy things to talk about. So virtual ends up being more beneficial anyway.
Mm. I also think that we live in times where it's not like a weakness to seek help and to seek support and to seek advice from someone like you. And I purposely use the word weakness right now, because recently I had some chat with friends and people, and they said to me, I quote them, like, I think it's a weakness if I need someone who helps me dealing with my mindset. What's your take on this?
I wouldn't say weakness. I would say that, if you are afraid to maybe tap into things that are difficult to talk about, what are you afraid to do on the table? There's always this correlation between where your mind lets you go and where your physical skills let you go. Um, it's not always a direct correlation, but your mind is always going to be active. When you play pool, when you play any sport, when you do anything, your mind is controlling your body. So if you don't have control over your mind, your body will feel the impact of that. If you start thinking about, okay, this person's watching me, or I'm about to win $10,000 if I just run out these last 3 balls. I mean, you need to learn how to control your mind to really focus on what you have to do. So, in terms of mental coaching being a weakness, it's honestly a strength to have those skills.
Mm. That's a beautiful way to see it or to look at it. I never thought about it, but I just love that you see it as or you can see it as a superpower, so to say. Um, I know the next question is for sure, like for you, maybe impossible to answer, but can you give us one example which could work for a certain person or certain player? Let's just do some examples here. Just imagine the situation you just described, that you're hill, you're on the nine, you're maybe shaky, super nervous, you feel the pressure, you feel people observing, watching you. What kind of recommendations would you give to a player like this? And I know that it's basically impossible to answer this question because everyone is different, but could you give us some
Yeah.
examples?
So, one thing that I might suggest would be to picture yourself in a bubble when you're playing pool. So, if you're in a bubble, you get to dictate what comes into the bubble. Typically, I recommend it's just you, your cue, and the table, and that's it. The score is outside of the bubble, other people, money, your opponent, everything else is outside of the bubble. When you start to get nervous about where you're at in a match or in a game, it's because you're thinking about either the future, the past, or the circumstances. So you're either stuck on a shot that you missed 10 minutes ago still, and it's heavy on you, or you're either worried, or you're worried about, what it will mean if you make or don't make this next ball, or you're worried about, what it will mean to the public if you don't make the ball. So there's a lot of different things that can be interfering, and that's what causes feeling pressure, feeling nervous. So I like the visual of the bubble because everything is kind of there. It's outside of the bubble, but it's not getting inside of you to do what you have to do. So that's something I would really help players grow, so that it's something that they could develop in their own game, because these things won't come naturally. If I show you a draw shot, great, you could see it. But if you don't keep practicing it, it's not going to come naturally. and you won't have as much control over drawing the cue an inch or versus 5 inches. So that's just sort of like an idea of what I would start with, but there are a lot of different visuals and skills that I do with each player. Like you said, everybody's different. So if that doesn't work for somebody, great, let's figure something else out.
Yeah, and I think that's also a trait of mental coaches like you, that you are not only, it's not like a personal habit that you need to adapt to an individual. I think that's a necessity. I think that's basically the core of your doing, correct?
One of my favorite things about being a therapist or a mental coach is creativity. I will come up with so many different ideas and let's try them on for size. Let's just see how it goes. If it doesn't work, great. Next session, we're going to find something different. And it's fun for that reason. It's not a one size fits all.
Tara, you work with professionals, you work with semi-professionals, but what is your background? Because I assume, and also my friends ask me, like, I'm very confrontative right now, is who is this lady that she is thinking that she can work with professionals and people like me? So what is your background?
That is a fair question. So I went to college and graduate school for 7 years to become a therapist. So my background in schooling is a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in sports psychology, and an advanced degree in clinical mental health. So I'm licensed in the state of New York, and I have a master's degree in sports psychology. So my background as a therapist is sound. My background as a pool player, I honestly started playing pool in grad school because I went to grad school in Massachusetts. I didn't have any friends. That's how I made friends, fell in love with the game. So I haven't been playing pool for my whole life. This really was somewhat recent, maybe the last 6 or 7 years. And I really fell in love with the game, like I said. And I would compete in local tournaments. I would compete in really anything that was in my area. But then I started realizing that I just love being a therapist more, and I wasn't really willing to dedicate more time to the physical skill. I'd rather be coaching. So I'll always have that love of playing, but I definitely want to put my focus into enhancing other people's games because that's just where my heart is.
It must be a funny situation for you when you come to a tournament and you're like a participant in a tournament and you meet someone else who you're actually coaching right now.
I just played in a memorial tournament because I felt that was the right thing to do for the person who passed. So it's funny, a couple of opponents said, it's crazy seeing you as a player. And I said, I know this is just for fun. They did make comments and they said, how are you going to be a mental coach and then compete against people? And I said, don't worry, this is a one-time thing. You don't have to worry. So that definitely came up. And that is a reason I stopped playing too. It is a conflict of interest. I'd never want any of my athletes to worry about facing me in competition. I don't want it to be like that. So yes, that was a one-time thing.
I just love the approach of using adding mental coaching to like the personal development. I was so blessed during the pandemic to talk to so many professional pool players, and I learned so much about like their preparation, their training routines. And many of them, like publicly or secretly, on record or off record, admitted that one way or the other, they also deal with the mental part of the game, because the mental part of the game is so big, especially like on the top level when the pressure is very high. But on the other hand, on the side note, I think are there also some lighthearted and funny things you experience as a therapist without like talking names or giving any secrets away? Because usually when we think about therapists and mental coaching, it's always that serious, and it's always about like serious parts, but are there fun parts as well in your business?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be honest, a lot of mental coaching, like when people come to me continuously, it will end up being life related as well. We end up talking about things going on in someone's life, and because that's also impacting their game. So we focus on separating that from competition. So with that said, it tends to lead to relationship things and, you know, circumstances going on outside of the pool hall at home. I wouldn't say fun and light because it's still something to talk about and work through, but there are other parts of coaching that come into play, and even character development, learning about yourself, who you want to be, how you think others see you versus how they actually see you. So there's a lot of different components to this. It's not just help me get confidence and then I'm done with you. It's more so like, let's take a look at the big picture and see how we can create this version of yourself that you're comfortable presenting and that you feel you can aptly present.
You just mentioned that, yeah, you just mentioned a lot of topics right now. One question that also came up in chats and talks with people I know and friends is they have no idea how long like mental coaching is required. Is this something like, is this a one-off meeting, or does it take, like when I start with it's like a thing forever as long as I compete? Or is there something in between? Like, can you enlighten us on here as well a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it really is dependent on the athlete. If they're competing a lot, they're going to want to meet to check in, talk about what went well, what they want to continue working on, what could we have done differently, and reflect. But then also, how do we prepare? So, John Mora and I, for example, we meet every 2 weeks or so. And that's been consistent for a while. But someone like Kennedy, she and I will meet maybe once a month or once every other month to check in. And because she takes a lot of notes in sessions, she works on these things. So I actually wouldn't recommend weekly because I think you need time to apply what I give you in session and see what's working, see what's not working, see what you want to continue addressing, or something new might come up. So in terms of working on it forever, I mean, it's sort of like if you compare it to a coach that you have for your game. You might feel like you're in a good place, you're competing, you might not have time to see your coach, but you might want to check in. So it's really on a individual level of how much you would want to meet.
Now we talked a lot about like the mindset, and do you think, or out of your experience, are sports the same? Like, pool is a different sport in terms of the physical, let's say, strain you put on your body. It's like different, like tennis or ice hockey or cycling or triathlon or whatever. But in general, like when it comes to pressure situation, when it comes to situation like, am I going all in, or am I going to like hold back or whatever? Can you compare sports, or do you have experience with different sports and how they affect the mindset of an athlete?
Yeah, so I do work with other sports. I always have since I have gone to school for it. But since I've been focusing on pool players, I'm definitely noticing a difference in the mental game for pool specifically. There needs to be a lot of patience, acceptance, short-term memory in pool, and forgiveness. So it's definitely different than a sport such as tennis, because tennis, you're actively against your opponent, right? You're hitting the ball back and forth. In pool, it's just you at the table. So right off the bat, the nature of the game is going to create a different approach. So because you don't have the unknown of an active opponent, where are they going to hit the ball to me? You can take a little bit more control of what you're doing at the table as opposed to reacting or responding to what your opponent is doing. So because of the individualism at the table, it creates a different mentality.
That reminds me of the podcast I did with Ralph Souquet. I think everybody knows Ralph Souquet, like one of the top players from Germany, and he's still going like with 52 or 53 years old. He said pool is the most brutal sport he knows, because when you miss a ball, the only thing that's left for you to do is to go back to your chair, watch your opponents like potting the balls and possibly win. And you cannot do anything about it. And I think that's what you mean. Like in tennis, you miss a ball and off you go to the next point and you have another chance. But in pool, especially in certain like games like straight pool, you're just there to lose basically. And if an opponent runs 150 out on you in straight pool, like I think that must be very hurtful.
I mean, sometimes in pool, though, you just have to tip your cap. You know, if someone plays well, not for any fault of your own, you just have to, you know, kind of shake their hand. You played well. It had nothing to do with you. The other player just had a very good approach that day. I kind of say that there are two things that will determine how well or poorly someone plays in any given day. And those two things are how you approach your game, the table, like how you show up basically, and how well you adjust. Those
Can
two
I ask you
things.
what you mean with how you approach the table? Can you explain this a little bit?
So, how you show up or how you approach the match, it's how ready you are, your feeling of readiness, your energy level, your confidence in yourself, like how your mind is on that day. If you just got into a fight with your significant other, you maybe didn't sleep well the night before and you already feel it's impacting you. You know, if there are too many circumstances that you feel are impacting you, you might not show up a certain way or in the ideal way. So it's how you show up. By the way, you can overcome those things I just mentioned on the day. So it just takes some work. But it's how you show up that day and how well you adjust. So if things aren't quite lining up the way you wanted them to, or you don't feel as connected, or even if you miss shots you should have made, you didn't make good decisions, how can you adjust in that moment on that day to where you give yourself a chance, to where you are, you know, basically turning it around for yourself? So those two things could really determine how someone plays.
Yeah, that's just awesome, because I know it from myself. Like I'm also like a hobby pool player, and I know that on some days I can adjust very good with like a shot missed or even with a loss of a match, and on other days completely not. I know that's also very difficult for you to answer, but how would you find out what's the reason that on one day I can like adjust very easily and another day it's sort of impossible? How would we
Sometimes,
approach to find out?
yeah, I think that there could be some different circumstances that are happening below the surface, you know, some underlying things. It could be the way you feel, what you've eaten that day, people in the room, your opponent, the volume of the music, temperature of the room. You really never know if it's one thing or a collection of things. Maybe it's on a Thursday and you just had a busy work day versus a Saturday morning when you feel refreshed, you know? So there are a number of different reasons that will affect our patience level or our adjustment level.
Tara, so just to finish our talk, I want to ask you one or two more questions. Can we expect to see you at some tournaments? Are you going to be at Mosconi Cup again? Are you going to be at some local tournaments in the United States? What are your plans?
I hope to be at tournaments, and um, you know, definitely make last minute decisions to go to them. It's usually not a planned thing unless, you know, a player needs me to be there and we work that out. But sometimes I just kind of decide very last minute, you know, things are going well. I could slip away for a few days. Why not? Let's do it. That's kind of how a lot of the tournaments this year worked out. In
Uh,
the United States, I hope I can as well go to local tournaments.
that's the perks of being self-employed, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Tara, can you just once more tell our viewers and my viewers where they can where they can get in contact with you, how they can reach you?
Yeah, so my Instagram page is Insight Performance Coaching. That's also my website and Facebook. So you're welcome to send me a message. You could even private message me on my social media pages. So I'm open to meeting whoever is ready.
Just get in contact with Tara. I can tell you she's for sure worth the buck, and she's such a nice and humble person, and she helps so many professional players, so many semi-professional players to a certain degree. I also benefit on a daily basis from what Tara is putting out on her social media. Tara, thanks so much for taking your time. You're sitting in New York, I'm sitting here in Baden in Austria. Luckily, technology makes it happen that we two could chat here. And thanks so much for taking your time and joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you good luck in your upcoming competitions.
Thanks so much, Taom.
Thanks.